Hey folks, welcome to another episode of TA Outdoors. You join me here in the woods, and it's been a long time coming this episode. I've had lots of comments. It's peak summer at the moment. We've had a really dry spell, and I just wanted to give you some of my kind of hot weather, dry weather fire lighting tips. Feel free to add your own if I miss out any down below, but this is just a few tips that I use if I'm lighting fire in kind of dry, dangerous conditions. The first tip, and arguably the most important tip, is if it has been dry for a long time, don't have a fire. At all. Don't have a fire. Just bring some cold food with you. You can last days, weeks with cold food, you know, preserved food, dry food, things like that. So if you're going on a trip and the weather's going to be dry, or you know it's going to be dry, pack some cold food. That's certainly something that I do even on small solo overnights or longer trips. I'll always have some cold food with me, just in case that weather is a little bit too dry. Then I know I've got something to at least feed myself. The next tip is, if you're having a fire on dry ground, before you even start it, you need to clear the area. And I do this in winter as well, even when it's wet and damp. Clear the area of any debris, any leaves. I've used this fire, I think it was last week I made a film here, but you'll see me clearing this area as much as I can of the leaves because they are dry. And although I knew it was safe to light the fire there because I've had enough experience in this particular woodland of doing it, it's still really good practice. Clear all those leaves. You want at least a metre and a half ring around where you're going to have your fire, because this is like dry tinder. So you only need 1 or 2 sparks to hit these leaves, and then it will rip and creep through the entire woodland, especially if it's a windy day. So make sure you clear a nice area around where you're going to have your fire, so that any sparks that come off it won't then ignite the rest of the forest. It sounds simple, guys, but it's trust me, you wouldn't believe me how many people do not do that. You might not be able to see this here, but essentially here's where I had my fire last week, and you can see there's already leaves here. So you need to be sweeping from this, which is the entire forest floor at the moment, around this particular beach area of the woodland. You need to get rid of all this and go down to this stuff, solid dirt. That's the stuff that you need to check that you're going to have a better chance of not setting the fire alight if you had it on the wet ground. Right, so I've cleared the leaves and the debris out of the way. I'm down to the forest floor. The next thing I do personally is I literally feel it. I dig around with my fingers and I feel, is it damp? If it's damp, that means there's been rain fairly recently, and I know that I'm relatively safe to have a fire because those hot embers are not going to go as deep into the ground and spread along the tree roots underneath and potentially catch the forest fire alight. The other reason I do it is because it gives me a good idea of what the type of soil is around here. Now I know this woodland really well because it's my woods, and I know that it's beach. So underneath here is lots of clay. I'm up on a clay hill, and so I don't have to go too far down through the topsoil layer before I hit clay. That's a much better base to have a fire on than, say, somewhere like peat, which I'll show you now is a totally different woodland. This forest, on the other hand, I've been filming in for the past 15 years or so. It's a totally different woodland to the one that I just showed you. This one in the summer is a giant tinderbox. It's full of Scots pine trees. The ground it consists of what's called peat. It's a very acidic soil, and it's very light, fluffy, and the soil itself is almost like a tinder. It's so, especially in the summer months when it's really, really dry, I'll never have a fire directly on the floor here unless we've had a substantial amount of wet weather. Another thing I'll check and just be wary of, you can still have a fire in it, but the strong winds. Today is a relatively windy day, and if you're not able to tell whether the wind is strong or not, just grab any leaves that are nearby, drop them, and if they're blowing horizontally, it's a pretty strong windy day. This means your fire could start to spread embers and ash over towards areas that you've not cleared, and could also, windy conditions will also make your fire a lot bigger because that oxygen and heat will go into it, so you'll get a lot more flames in your fire, and it could throw out a lot more sparks. So the next tip is, if you are going to have a fire, or you need to cook some food, or you need to boil water, for me personally, the next step I would do is just a gas stove. You can get tiny ones like this. They really take up no room in your backpack whatsoever. And you can get smaller gas canisters, you can get larger gas canisters. They actually last quite a long time. If you're on a multi-day trip, it would take a while before you actually get through one of these. even the size like this will get me through a number of meals before I'd have to either have it refilled or go and buy another one. They really don't take up much space in your pack. They're very fast, and you'll often boil water a lot faster on this than you would on a fire, and they certainly take a lot less effort to get going. They're also much safer than having an open fire because they don't throw out sparks, and even in strong winds the flame, and you probably saw it in that clip there, doesn't tend to go above the kind of the edge of the stove here, the seats that the cup would sit on, and so you really don't need a huge flame. It's not throwing out sparks. Really simple. It's the next step I use before I even think about having a fire and it's been very dry weather. It's something I take with me when I'm having a fire on a gas stove. It's just a little windshield like this. They flat pack, they fold out, and you wrap these around your gas canister like this. This one has a little spike here in the end which pushes out and goes into the ground. You might just be able to see that there to pinch it in. But essentially wherever the wind is coming from, you can wrap it around your stove and then put these spikes in place. The ground's really hard today, so you can see it's dry, which is why I'm making this film. And then that keeps the wind, not only keeps the wind off your flame here, it prevents, you know, any heat going out into potentially causing a forest fire and sparks, if they did have some. They prevent the wind from blowing your flame towards anything that's a bit, you know, tinder, any dry tinder that's nearby, maybe dry leaves. But also, they act as a heat reflector, whether it's reflective material. It keeps all that heat in here. If your pot's on the top here, it will bounce that heat back and actually make your water boil a lot quicker. So alongside and similar to the gas stove, I also have a spirit burner. This is like a Trangia spirit burner. Lots of you guys know these. It's essentially just like an alcohol spirit burner, like methylated spirits. So this is kind of an all-in-one nesting kit, the BCB cook set. I think it's Mark II. But essentially, if it's really hot weather, this just folds out. I can take the Trangia spirit burner out. This is just a little pot hanger that actually goes with this cup. Clips on top of it like that, and then I can hang this cup over a fire if I need to, but it's not actually part of the kit, it's separate, as is the lid that was made separate by someone for me years ago with little strainer holes. Again, not, you know, just an addition to the set that I can put in here. But the way this works, I'll show you quickly. I carry the methylated spirits in a little plastic thing here. I'll only put a little bit in so you can see. Pour all that in there. Hopefully you guys can see this. There, that's lit. You can't see that. I can see it, probably. But I'm guessing you guys can't actually see that. There is a blue flame flickering there. I can feel the heat coming off it as well, so I'm not going to put my hand over it. It takes a while to sort of just get warm. But you can see how clean it burns. So I pop that in there. Now you can see it. I'll show you. There, see there is a flame there. So then that would fold over there, like that. So that's still burning, that's really hot now there, it's such a clean flame. And then I'd put my cup on there and I'd just let that boil away. But this is totally protected, the flame under here, and the elements, the dry ground is all protected by this whole base system. So it's really, really great for kind of hot weather, dry weather, and you're worried about forest fires. To put it out, I've just got the cap here. This is another cap that can add a filter, but I just drop that on there and that puts the flame out. And that's now out. Let it cool down. Drop it on, let it cool down, and then when it's cooled, you'll be able to take it out and start packing it away. So the next step for me, as I assess the weather and check how dry it is, and if I'm going to have a fire and I want to have that open flame fire, then I'll be going for things like this, a twig stove or a folding twig stove. And this essentially is just a square box. This one, I'm not sponsored, but it's called Firebox. It's a USA based design, and essentially it is literally just a box that you can have a fire in. It's got these little flaps where you can feed the sticks through once the fire's there. Inside there's a removable ashtray here, So the fire and the coals and the embers that fall down, all those hot coals that fall down from your fire, don't hit the forest floor itself. Hopefully, if you're sensible, they hit the ashtray there, again protecting the forest floor from potentially catching light. You can also manage it quite a bit better in terms of opening it up if you need more oxygen to come in, or shutting it down. If you need to cook on it, you've got different options. I use these little metal spikes here, stakes, and that allows me to sit a cup on top of there, and then I can just feed sticks in the side here to keep the fire going and boil water. It's usually enough to just boil water or cook a quick meal, fry something, and then I'll let it burn out often. It's not something that I use to keep me warm at night because it's a summertime thing, and this is a hot weather, warm, dry weather fire lighting episode. The other type I use is this. It's very similar, but it comes like that. This is different though in the way that it operates. I'll just show you. There's multiple parts. So you have this part, you have your ashtray. That should sit through like that. That's the kind of area that you'll have your fire in. And then you have this extra bit, which is essentially where air can come in through these little holes here. And there's the top piece where I'd have my cup for my fire. So this is essentially very similar to the other stove in that it's a twig stove, you use twigs, but this is a gasifier. So there's this holes in here. If I lift it up, there's the ashtray underneath, but there's also gaps for air to flow in and under, up through it. If I take that off and show you the inside, you can see it there as well. Small little holes there, and you might just be able to see around the edge here, there's holes here. And what this does is it's a secondary burn. So the gases that are given off during that primary burn as the sticks are burning, the smoke and the gases that are given off are then reignited through these holes here, and it's called a wood gasifier. So it burns off those secondary gases that are burnt off by the fire, and it's very, very efficient, gives you a very clean flame. And again, the main thing, like we're focusing on this episode, it keeps everything safe. No embers are hitting the floor, they're hitting this, no coals, sorry. And it's also great in strong winds because the fire is pretty well protected by the edge here. And so these two are my options if I don't want to have a gas fire or an alcohol spirit burner fire. I want to actually have an open fire, but I also am worried about having a campfire setting the forest alight. These are the options that I then go to next before I even think about lighting an open fire. Much more manageable as well. If you need to put the fire out, you can just pour water straight in the top of this one or straight in the top of that one. A lot more manageable. And if you don't want to have twig stoves and you really do want to kind of get that open fire feeling, then there's one more thing that I do use, which I'll show you in this clip here. I've had one of these for years and I cannot for the life of me find the one that I've had. So I've had to get a new one. They're not expensive, they're about £15. So $20 or something like that. They're basically a fire bowl. So essentially what it is, if I just get the legs out here, these are great for raising your fire off the floor. And you just pop these little legs in. And I've used mine for years in the summer months, it's great, but I just can't find it. So they have little legs to raise them off the ground anyway, so that's your whole fire tray, your ashtray. Essentially all the coals will land on that, they don't go on the forest floor. I'm up here at the cabin in the woods because even today I don't want to have a fire in this woodland on the forest floor because it's so dangerous. So I'm just doing it on the cabin wood, which is still a little bit damp. And then essentially just pull it out and it creates this bowl like that. So you've suddenly got a raised fire pit. So it folds down nice and small, and obviously the legs come off and you can put them in there, and then when you open it, it goes into a big enough fire bowl. I'll just get a quick fire going and just show you, but it's a great way of keeping that fire off the floor. There are some small air holes which you need to be aware of, hence why I'm not having this directly on that peaty forest floor, because that would be stupid. But you can see these small holes to allow airflow in, and obviously ash and coals are going to fall through that. You need to be aware of that. I'm going to fire this one up nice and easily with just a barbecue fire lighter. But essentially, yeah, you can get a fire going pretty quickly with these. In fact, I don't even need that much wood. Let's just have a small one today. Good in the wind, relatively good in the wind, because this acts like a windshield, this side bit. And obviously if you need to put the fire out, it's controlled. You're only ever going to really have a fire that's big enough to fit in this. It's not going to start spreading sideways like a campfire would. So if you desperately need to put it out, you just pour some water on it, and it's all contained. It's enough to almost take a bottle of water, a bottle of drinking water, to put it out. And yeah, then it shouldn't take long to put the fire out. So they are much safer than having a campfire directly on the floor. It's another option. I'm just trying to give you guys some options of things that I've used that do help. See, it's raised up off the floor, so it'd be raised up off the forest floor, so there's no chance of the heat from the bottom of the pan heating up the floor to a point, the forest floor, the heat to a point where it ignites or smoulders. But you can get a decent enough fire in it. I think they do different sizes. You see the size of my hand, it's bigger than, probably about the size of 2 of my hands together. Certainly enough to boil water on. Even now I'm watching for sparks that if they come off, you know, I'm wary that I might need to put it out. That's another point, is with summer and hot weather, is to always watch your fire. Don't walk away from it and leave it for hours on end to go fishing or swimming or something like that. I personally in the summer try to keep an eye on the fire a lot more than I do in the winter months, where I can just dump loads of big wood on it in the winter, let it get some big fire going, some nice cooking coals. In the summer I'm much more wary and I keep an eye on my fire a lot more, just in case it starts to creep or move. Then I can be on it and put it out as quick as possible if I need to. It's common sense. I know it sounds really stupid to probably quite a lot of you, but you'd be surprised how many people don't know about the basics of fire and how it can spread. And it's something that I'm trying to get across to as many people as possible. So if you could share this video, it would be really helpful. And like I say, share some of your tips in the comments below. That would also be helpful. One of the other things to consider is how close are you to a water source. Water is going to be your best friend if you're having a fire in hot weather and you will need to put it out. I will always have water nearby. Now if you're near a natural water source like a lake or a river, you have that option to be able to put the fire out obviously a lot easier, a lot quicker, because you have the access to that water. And the sensible thing to do would be to have your fire relatively close to the water so that you know you're able to put it out quickly. If not everybody has that option. Obviously you can look for small lakes, ponds or puddles, but they might not be about when it's been dry for a couple of months. So in that case you're down to either your water bottle. I'll always carry more with me in the summer anyway, which is another great tip. You know, minimum 3 litres at least if I'm coming out in the summer, especially when I'm doing work and camera work and filming on top of setting up shelters or tents and things like that. I get through probably 3 litres in a 24-hour period. And that extra litre, 2 litres is for drinking, and normally that extra litre I have is for putting my campfire out. And I'll show you this clip right here. This is a really important one for if you're having an open fire. You will see that as I go to put the fire out, I let the coals burn down to as small as possible. Often I'll sit around on that morning after an overnight and I will let those coals burn out. I won't try and put the fire out straight away while it's still hot. I'll watch them burn down and I'll pack up all my gear and my tent or my tarp. I'll take down my shelter if I was sleeping in a shelter. Take all those out, let that fire burn down, and then to put it out, I'll use a stick. I'll punch holes in the ground around the fire and in the middle of where the fire was. And then I'll pour some of that extra litre of water around the edge of the fire and over the fire itself. And that is then getting that water to penetrate into that drier, hot soil that could potentially have, you know, a coal, burning underneath the ground into tree roots and things like that. It will help to put all those out. Like I say at the very beginning of the episode, don't have a fire. If the weather's been dry for a good few weeks, even a few months, definitely do not have a fire. It's not worth it. It's really not worth it. You run the risk of not only devastating thousands of acres of prime woodland, but also natural habitat for wildlife and potentially the risk to humans. So you've just got to be really, really careful. Often these wildfires are started, certainly here in the UK, the majority of the time, they're started from disposable barbecues or cigarettes. Sometimes they're even started from a glass bottle that's been on the field, usually in fields, a glass bottle that's been open to the sunlight and it's acted like a solar fire, you know, a solar lens magnifying glass, and it's set off a fire that way. Another thing to consider in the warm summer months is what type of meal are you cooking? I'll often go for quick things when it's been really, really dry weather, things that I can fry or things that I can boil within 20 minutes. Often frying, everything's cooked that I need to within 5 to 10 minutes max. So that means I need less of a fire, less of the hot coals. If you're doing things like Dutch oven recipes that take over an hour to a few hours, then you're going to need a longer fire that's going to burn down into the ground a lot deeper and probably spread a lot further. So think about the recipes that you want to be cooking outdoors in the summer and be aware of how long that's going to need a fire for. If you need to boil water, you desperately need to boil water, make use of the early flame of a campfire when you're putting those first sticks on. That tends to be when you get the biggest flame. Try and use a pot hanger, or if you've got trivet to keep your pot over the fire, or a tripod hanging with some paracord, and you'll be able to hang your pot over the fire. You make use of that early flame, because then you don't need to build such a big fire up to be able to boil your water. And where you don't need to build a big fire up, it means you don't need to have that hot coals on the ground for longer than you need to. It's easier to put out. Another thing that I tend to do if I've got a long-term fire pit going, or again if it's a relatively dry area and I want to be able to protect the surrounding forest, is I will build a fire ring. Now if there's no rocks in the area, I would just use wood, and normally I'll try and build it out of rocks, any nearby rocks that I can find. Obviously be aware of rocks that are near the river or water, because they can expand and explode, but at the end of the day you're trying to protect the forest, and just having a ring of rocks around a fire makes a huge difference to any sparks that fly out sideways. It just stops that fire spreading sideways along the forest. Doesn't stop it burning down into the ground. If you're still in peaty ground and it's very, very dry, it doesn't stop it burning down, but it does stop it, or reduce the chance of it spreading to the sides and going out to surrounding trees and tree roots that are growing nearby. So if you've not got, well, if I've not got rocks or stones in the area, then I'll use logs. I'll use some slightly bigger logs. Now obviously you do run the risk of those logs catching light, and often they do catch light, but I'll tend to use these types of fire pits with the wood in the winter months, and in the summer months where it's really, really dry, I just won't have a fire there altogether. I'll wait for it to rain for a few days, know that the ground's more saturated, and then I can be a little bit more safe doing that. The other thing you'll often see me carry in videos is a shamag or a shamag, which is essentially like a cotton scarf. I use it for all sorts of things. In the really hot summer months, I'll use it to kind of cover my head and my face to keep the sun off. I use it for carrying things. You can bundle it up into a kind of makeshift carrying sack, and I think I've carried rocks in it and all sorts before, or just laying it out, putting gear on. They're really useful. And what you can do is, if you've got your extra kind of litre of water, is you can soak those shamags, get them soaking wet, and if you desperately need to put a campfire out, if you try to chuck a litre of water like this on a campfire, it's kind of going to go nowhere. Yes, you'll be able to stamp some of it out, but it still doesn't go as far. Whereas if you saturate that shamag, get it absolutely soaking wet, you can get that on the fire to put those initial flames out and kill off the oxygen. Don't leave it on the fire, because water will evaporate, and then you'll eventually be, it'll start burning through it. But I have done it in the past where I've needed to put a fire out quickly. I've soaked a shamag, put it over the fire, it's put it out, then I've pulled it away, and I've been able to stamp on it afterwards. Otherwise, if you go to stamp on it when the flames are still going, your clothing's just going to set fire, and then you're in deep trouble. So it's something I've done in the past. I always carry a shamag on me for other reasons, but I have used it in the past to put fire out. It's not my primary way of putting a fire out, but I have used them, and perhaps it's something you guys might have to use down the line. Hopefully not, but it is something I've done, especially if you're near a lake or something like that. You can soak that shamag in water, and it will absorb lots and lots of water, and you can bring it over to the fire, whack it on the fire to put the fire out, or try and wring it out, go back to the water, soak it up again, wring it out over the fire. You can get quite a lot of water from that. And another method you can do is moss. Moss is a great absorbing water. You've only got to squeeze it out under some water and watch the air bubbles be released, and as it expands it will suck and absorb all that moisture from lakes, rivers and things like that. You can bring that moss over to the fire, keep it nearby if you need to, and then it will hold that water for a very long time, and if you need to put the fire out, you can use that moss to put the fire out. So it's something, again, that I've done in the past to try and put fires out, is with moss, and it's not amazing, but it does help. And it's all these little things that I've had in my head and I've done over the years and learnt from, that perhaps could help you guys as well. Thanks so much for watching this episode. I know it's slightly different to what I do, but I've got some cool camping trips and camping videos coming up over the next few weeks, so I hope you guys are going to enjoy that. And thanks for tuning in. Don't forget, I've got my other channel, Life of Mike, for more behind the scenes footage and just other stuff that I do with my Land Rover, which I'm just hopefully getting fixed up now, and Dad's channel, TA Fishing, where there's loads of weekly fishing videos. Thank you for watching, guys. I do appreciate it, and I'll catch you in the next one.